Welcome, students, to today's Explainer. I'm going to be your guide as we put on our historian hats and rigorously evaluate some really fascinating statistical demographic models. Today, we're exploring a profound counterfactual, a concept we're calling uncolonized. We are going to be examining the demographic possibilities of Aboriginal Australia, asking ourselves what it would look like today had history taken a completely different path.
But before we can properly ground our statistical models, we actually need to take a hard look at our present reality. Right now, the current total population of Australia sits at about 27 million people. But when you contrast that with the population of people identifying as Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander today, well, that number is roughly 1 million plus. It's a stark contrast, and it clearly establishes the devastating reality of a massive historical demographic shock. To truly understand the history we're living in today, we have to look past this shock and build our counterfactuals.
So here is our syllabus for today's lecture. First, we'll define the historical baseline. Then we'll model 3 alternate history scenarios: trade modernization, escaping disease, and sovereign immigration, before wrapping it all up with a demographic synthesis. Okay, let's dive into this.
Part 1. Defining the historical baseline and those 2 big unknowns.
You see, in any statistical model, we have to identify our variables. Our very first unknown is the pre-1788 population size, and honestly, the estimates vary quite a bit. A highly conservative estimate puts that number at somewhere around 300,000 to 500,000, but a much more common academic range sits between 750,000 and 1.2 million, while some of the higher-end estimates suggest 1.5 million or even more. And our second unknown is determining exactly what the parameters of a non-colonized historical development would even look like. Crucially, we have to remember this wasn't just a sparse, empty population.
Quite the opposite, actually. Many regions supported incredibly dense, highly sophisticated land management systems and established semi-sedentary settlements. I want you to take a moment and just envision this ancient continent through a thought experiment with me. We're talking about extensive river systems shaped by just incredible deep environmental knowledge. Think about the ancient Budge Bim eel traps, these intricate, massive stone systems guiding catches right through river channels. Picture these regions absolutely buzzing with thriving activity and vast trade networks. This was a complex, deeply established society well before 1788.
Which brings us to Scenario 1, Trade Modernization. Here, we're going to evaluate what happens if Aboriginal societies remained politically independent and just gradually modernized on their own. Imagine this alternate timeline. Instead of settlement and dispossession, picture European merchant ships peacefully arriving on the horizon, trading openly with coastal communities. In this scenario, Aboriginal societies industrialize gradually through maritime trade routes connecting Australia all the way to Asia and Europe. There's no colonization here, just normal modernization and economic exchange.
Now, if we start from our baseline of roughly 750,000 to 1 million people in 1788 and apply long-term demographic growth to that, the math is frankly striking. Our model yields somewhere between 8 to 20 million Aboriginal Australians today. And to put that into perspective for a global comparison, we can look at the Maori population in New Zealand or Native American demographics. When we apply their historical recovery and growth rates to the vast land area of the Australian continent, this 8 to 20 million range actually aligns perfectly with global indigenous modernization metrics.
Moving on to Scenario 2, Escaping Disease.
To really grasp this scenario, we first have to define demographic shock. The most devastating effect of colonization wasn't just the physical displacement of people, it was a severe, catastrophic population collapse. Introduced diseases like smallpox, influenza, and measles, combined with brutal frontier violence and dispossession, utterly devastated the population over generations. But what if we remove that variable?
What if that catastrophic disease mortality simply never happened? Try to visualize healthy communities continuing completely uninterrupted through the centuries. Imagine this generational growth resulting in a gigantic, modern Aboriginal metropolis stretching all the way to the horizon, seamlessly blending advanced modern technology with foundational indigenous traditions.
Without that massive disease shock, population growth would have continued from a much, much larger base. Compounding that generational growth without a massive mortality event makes a demographic projection in the 10 to 30 million range highly mathematically plausible. And that brings us to Scenario 3, Sovereign Immigration.
So what happens if an independent Aboriginal nation eventually decides to open its borders to the globe? Picture an international airport in a highly prosperous Aboriginal majority nation. People from all around the world are arriving, and a diverse, multicultural society flourishes. But crucially, it does so proudly under a dominant, foundational indigenous culture.
In this model, if the total population of this hypothetical state reached modern Australia's 27 million, the Aboriginal people would still remain the large demographic majority. Depending on migration patterns and intermarriage, the Aboriginal population in this globally connected society could easily reach 15 to 25 million, or even more.
Finally, Section 5, the demographic synthesis. Now, what's really interesting about this synthesis is how the data comes together.
Bringing all of our statistical models together gives us a really comprehensive view of how these different modernization paths dictate population size projections. Scenario 1, which is based purely on trade and industrialization, gives us an 8 to 20 million range. Scenario 2, where we remove the catastrophic disease shock, elevates that range up to 10 to 30 million. And Scenario 3, sovereign immigration, settles at about 15 to 25 million plus. Now, obviously, there is no single, perfectly measurable fact here, but synthesizing these models brings us to a very defensible academic consensus. The middle estimate, most widely entertained by historians and demographers for an independent, non-colonized Australia, is probably right around 10 to 15 million Aboriginal Australians today. While it is speculative, it remains one of our absolute most statistically plausible alternate histories. And this brings us to the end of our lecture, and I want to leave you with a profound, lingering thought. If the greatest impact of colonization wasn't just physical displacement, but a massive demographic shock that completely reshaped generations, how much of modern history is simply the shadow of an interrupted timeline? Thank you so much for joining me in this explainer, students. Keep questioning the history you think you know.